Well, let's get back to the Iran conflict and break down the latest developments on this subject. Joining us for more is Reserves IDF Brigadier General Relik Shafir. He's a former Air Force base commander and one of Israel's legendary top guns. And Professor Gerald Steinberg, who heads, founder and head of NGO Monitor. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us. Gerald, I want to start with you. Just your breakdown on what you think is happening here. President Trump, it sounds like potentially telling different things to different partners here. But there are some things about this reported ceasefire that does seem relevant, particularly that it takes a number of steps, initiates a 60-day ceasefire while basically pushing the key nuclear issues a little down the road.
I'm going to do it in two parts, briefly. First of all, let's be careful about reports, leaks, deliberate leaks, manipulations. We're seeing this across the board, not just President Trump, not just in Washington, but also from Tehran. Everybody's leaking something which they claim is going to be the basis of the report, acceptable, not acceptable. Uranium is going to be taken out of the country, the enriched uranium, highly enriched uranium, not being taken out of the country. 60 days. Some people say, well, that's just enough time for the big soccer tournament that takes place, the World Cup in the United States, so that Trump wants to get that over with, and then after 60 days go back to war. We could have war starting again tomorrow. There's still a very large number of American forces in the region. But looking at the substance of what's being leaked and what's being put out there, if we take that as an attempt to create some sort of public support for a package along those lines, it is very problematic for Israel. First of all, the highly enriched uranium, enough to make a number of bombs, 60%, easily raised up to 90% if the Iranian capabilities can be quickly restored. There have been reports that Russia and China have been helping Iran restore. All of these things, of course, are unconfirmed, unverified, very questionable whether they're accurate or not. But if there's an agreement that does not remove the uranium in a short period of time, 30 days, I think 60 days is even too long, then it's going to be very, very difficult for Israel to accept those terms. Now, Israel could decide to act on its own, which will be a problem for Israel-American relations, and try to attack those facilities. But I think that's a major issue that is of great concern. Does this agreement will it include Hezbollah in Lebanon? If this forces on Israel a long-term ceasefire, and even perhaps forces Israel to withdraw in part or all the way back, that's also going to be a major problem. It will allow Hezbollah to reconstitute the threat that they had before October 7th. So there are many aspects of this that are raised, and we're going to have to wait to see what the details are, what the Israeli response is after the package is released.
Okay, well, Relik, I want you to pick up on some of Gerald's points, particularly how feasible or not is it that Israel could either take action now. They're not going to go against President Trump during a ceasefire, but if this thing just simply carries on in this kind of sort of like stalemate, and we know that Iran is rebuilding its missile capabilities, quite possibly its nuclear facilities, quite possibly even dealing with that buried enriched uranium. How realistic is for Israel to have any military options on its own, even with the approval of the U.S.? And, of course, the issue that Gerald raised about the war in the north against Hezbollah. What we're seeing is that this agreement would allow Israel to react against, I guess they call it Hezbollah provocations. But, of course, it is allowing Hezbollah to sort of reconstitute itself and potentially rearm itself. How problematic would that be for Israel going forward?
Let's start off with the North. If this Iran deal goes on, and it is clear that the Iranians were able to manufacture an agreement that focuses on the nuclear issue, and they lingered on that so that their ballistic missile program and proxy program would not be part of the resolution, which is very worrying. But in all honesty, the United States went out into this war to take out the nuclear capabilities that we'll talk about later. But what happens in Lebanon Israeli forces are stationed in Lebanon, about 10 to 15 kilometers north of the border, so there's no direct ability to fire into Israeli towns. If this agreement calls for the Israeli forces to withdraw, I don't see any government, either this one or the next one, agreeing to this kind of constituted arrangement, because this would put the Israeli villages and towns directly under threat, and will result in Hezbollah willingly firing if they want to. So there needs to be some kind of an in-between agreement that Israel stays put where it is and the firing stops, and then go into negotiations. And I think this is the only thing that Israel can really insist on, because no government can actually agree to the previous position where the Hezbollah could fire at will. So that part. About Iran, I think the Iranians have played their cards in a way that goes back to the saying that Iran never won a war and never lost a deal. Even their foreign minister Arkachi, after Donald Trump wrote out a book about how to make deals, wrote his own book about deals, and apparently he's more attuned to the way they make deals in the Middle East than anybody else, or at least the Americans. So I think the Americans are trying to find a way out. They have the Mondial coming up, and then the elections in November, and I think the 60 days will probably be extended beyond the 60 days to cover the elections, and only then we'll start, and maybe we'll go back to Obama's agreement in 2015 that had some kind of a control over their program. So it looks pretty dismal at this time.
Well, let me, Gerald, pick up on that. You mentioned both of you also left out the 250th anniversary of U.S. independence celebrations that President Trump is planning. So that's already July there. And yes, of course, President Trump is always, there's a report that came out just in the last couple hours in the Times of Israel saying an Israeli official says Trump assured Netanyahu if a final deal does not include the removal of the enriched uranium, then Israel will be free to act. But again, the further we get, the longer this goes on, if the Strait of Hormuz is reopened, if we have the midterms, if other issues come up, such as the Cuba situation that's developing, Gerald, doesn't that sort of lessen the odds of the U.S. taking any real action, certainly on this similar scale as we saw earlier against Iran?
All of this is correct. I agree with the analysis and the pessimism. However, to make this a little more interesting, and I think we have to be somewhat more realistic in this, I'll start with Senator Lindsey Graham's comments in the last 24 hours or so. And he was very strong against the rumors, the reports, the leaks of an agreement, particularly on the nuclear issue, but also, I think, broader in terms of leaving the regime in power and strengthened. That's not easy for President Trump to accept from his own main supporters, Republicans in the Senate, very much respected, that are criticizing the terms that are leaked, that are reported. Now, that still may be subject to a lot of internal discussions. That may move Trump back in the other direction. The other aspect which I want to emphasize is what this does. You're absolutely correct. There are many reasons to expect that if there's a temporary 60-day ceasefire, and that will leak into many more reasons, because that takes us at least through the midterm elections. And of course, nobody in the U.S., certainly not President Trump or anybody else, would want to have the whole crisis, the oil crisis, and massive increase in gas prices spike again as they are now. So they're going to want to maintain that agreement. Iran certainly has the U.S. over a barrel on this, and I agree with the analysis that they've never lost a negotiation. They're very good at that. And they ended the war still in power with enough missiles and not having lost the nuclear capability or given up on Hezbollah. So they're in a good position. However, I do think there's going to be pushback. And I think the question is, and what distinguishes the Trump administration from the Obama agreement, the JCPOA back in 2015, that was supposed to freeze the Iranian nuclear program or even wind it down a bit for a period of up to about 10 or 15 years, depending on which aspects were enforced. That bought time, and this agreement is to buy time. But Obama did nothing with the time that was bought. There was no more pressure on the Iranian regime, on the Revolutionary Guard, which now controls everything in Iran straightforwardly. If the Trump administration, the Americans, use the time that they're buying through a temporary agreement, as difficult as that might be for Israel to swallow, but maintains the intense pressure on Iran, maintains the ability to go back to a conflict if necessary, and Israel has a more or less free hand, then I think that that time can be used to put more pressure on Iran. The agreement is supposed to have some sort of terms where Iran will then relinquish, will ship out the 60% enriched, highly enriched uranium. If they don't do that, if there's no implementation, we could go back to a conflict, a hot conflict, a kinetic conflict as it's called. So I'm not entirely pessimistic, but I think there's good reason to be worried about this.
Right. I just want to ask Relik, if Israel has a free hand, but if the regime is left standing, its proxies more or less still standing, some of the sanctions are lifted, even if there's other kinds of diplomatic pressure, Relik, what options really are for Israel moving forward in terms of dealing with this new reality, or return to an old reality?
Well, in Hebrew, there's a term of mowing the grass, which means that Israel may want to strike again and again around the nuclear facilities, not to allow free access, etc. Israel cannot bomb the facilities because it doesn't have the type of weapons used by the B-2s, the almost 30,000 pound bombs that were used in at the time that they took out the nuclear plant. And we don't even know if the Iranians have access to the nuclear material in there. Perhaps the intelligence people know, but the public doesn't know whether they're accessible at all. So there are many questions left. But can Israel strike? Yes, it can. Can it take down the regime? Can it stop Iran from, let's say, going quiet for a couple of years, waiting out Donald Trump, and then going on a long-term program? Probably not. And this leaves the Middle East in an unstable situation, plus the fact that Iran is able to reflect on its neighbors and threaten its neighbors. If Israel strikes them, then this will lead to a lot of pressure on the United States. And so I think the future is going to be unstable unless the United States is insistent on completing the deal down to the minute details, and putting enough pressure on Iran so they can't move out of it, which, to my understanding of the U.S. policies, are not of a high probability.
All right. Well, as President Trump likes to say, let's see what happens. Professor Gerald Steinberg, General Relik Shafir, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Good to talk to you.